All right, well, welcome everyone. I know we're at the top of the hour and some folks will trickle in a little later, but just as a reminder, my name is Shannon Roberts. I'm a program manager with the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, and this is our December session for the evaluation and research learning exchanges. Today we have Noel Vest presenting on involving peers in evaluation, involving them in research. That looks like and why it's important to have them at the table. Just a quick note, please stay on mute while we do the presentation. This is being recorded. You'll get a follow-up email from me probably Thursday with an evaluation link on the series so we can improve and keep providing you with topics that you're interested in. And you also get a copy of the slides and a link to this recording. And I just want to take some time to introduce Noel. He's an assistant professor at the Boston University School of Public Health. As a formerly incarcerated scholar, Dr. Vest advocates for social justice issues and public policy concerning substance use disorder recovery and prison reentry. His research interests include mental health, substance use disorders, poverty, social justice, addiction recovery, and pain. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Noel.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for that great introduction. It is absolutely wonderful to be here today. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this presentation. I think I'm looking more forward, honestly, to the question and answer a little bit later on. I find that, this presentations like this kind of sometimes will just I think that they lend themselves to kind of a robust conversation, and so I'm hoping to really kind of have an open dialogue here at the end. But I will go ahead and start sharing my screen, and hopefully everyone can see that. Are we looking okay there? Yeah. All right, perfect. All right, so this is going to be a really fun presentation. I'm going to chat through kind of a situation that happened to me. I guess it wasn't even last summer; it was the summer before, and it was it was a really interesting. I'll just say it was a really interesting time in my life in general. I just kind of gotten started on my own as a principal investigator research project, and so it was kind of a situation where I presented one thing and really got some feedback or some I don't know, some really interesting people that wanted to help, and so I want to kind of talk through that project. I'm also going to kind of talk through a little bit about kind of my journey into higher education, and hopefully it's very similar to what many people on this call have experiences with kind of as well. And so I'll talk through that a little bit, and then I'll kind of end. I really want to bring things together and really talk about the importance of higher education, the importance of research, and I think more than anything, the importance of including people with lived experience in recovery, lived experience as a peer into the foray of or into the base of people that we have doing research, and talk about a couple of projects that I've been involved with that I think are really kind of focus in on that. And so without further ado, I always have to put this slide in first. This just shows that I am supported by a National Institute of Drug Abuse grant. It's a K01 grant to look at collegiate recovery programs. And I'm actually going to talk through that research project here with everyone in just a minute. It's like an added bonus to this presentation because I'm going to really kind of, it really plays into the story and what kind of happened as a result of getting this grant. And so, like I mentioned, I'm going to spend a few minutes kind of talking about my background. again, I'm sure similar to many people on this call, I was a person that, very much so. You know, it's crazy to me when I think about it because, I pretty much had stayed away from any kind of drug or alcohol use almost all of my teen years, all of my high school and junior high years. I think that I had kind of a protective thing operating in my life. I was really into sports and wrestling, and so that took up a lot of time in my life. I didn't have a lot of time to devote to anything else really, other than wrestling kind of year round. And so it wasn't until, like I say, I turned 18 that I really started to, I think, use drugs and alcohol. But it wasn't until I was about 21 or 22 that I started to kind of use them in a way that was not rewarding anymore. It was, kind of a situation where I was using to kind of maintain rather than to feel any kind of pleasure. And about that time, I even though I didn't realize it at the time, I think that was kind of the crux of falling into addiction. I won't spend a whole lot of time. I'll just say that, like, again, many people on this call, I had a couple of things happen in my life. I went through a breakup. I had a daughter. I started my own business, and I think the culmination of all three of those things at the same time really kind of led into me wanting to escape reality more and more often. And it ended up in that downward spiral of addiction, really, for about 4 or 5 years, from when I was 22 to 26. But it eventually ended up in a 7-year prison sentence in the Nevada Department of Corrections. And it was there that I found recovery. I consider myself very, very lucky in that. Maybe I can. I'm not sure if someone's on mute. But it was there that I was introduced to some of the self-help programs out there for addiction. Again, really, really lucky that the prison that I was at offered both AA and NA and some other types of courses to just kind of examine. And I was, again, I think, lucky that I was able to kind of stay sober for about 3.5 years, which kind of allowed all those cobwebs in my head to dissipate. But this is really where the presentation begins, because I want to kind of talk about what happened from that point forward. And so the other thing that was really, really helpful or beneficial for me was that the prison that I was at had gotten a grant to bring in community college courses through the College of Southern Nevada, which was a college down right outside of Las Vegas, which was where I was housed in prison. And that really changed my life. It was this situation where this program had come in. I was starting to really do well in some of these courses. And I think that doing well in those courses just gave me, just enough inspiration to think that I may be able to enroll in college when I released from prison as well. The other thing that it got me thinking about too was just kind of, just thinking about my own journey and my own issues and kind of how I developed a substance use disorder, and how I ended up in prison. I think that was the bigger thing, and I started asking people around the yard, like, what had happened in your life that was, that ended you up here. And there seemed to be this common theme of mental health issues, untreated mental health issues, and untreated substance use disorder. And so it really kind of got me thinking, I think, really early on about that intersection of mental health and substance use disorders in a way that, I still try and think about things today. But it was kind of like this real, like, lived experience snapshot into what happens, I think, when you have untreated mental health and substance use disorder. And so this was really the beginning of my research career, even though I didn't really understand that that's what that was at the time. So I mentioned I had gained the courage to enroll in college right when I got out, and so I went to the nearest community college. I remember I had my dad drop me off the day I got out of prison, and I asked him, don't come back and pick me up until I had signed up for school. Totally thinking at the time that I was going to see, criminal history boxes that I was going to have to maybe explain, or maybe I would just kind of maybe they wouldn't even take my application. But totally, like, I think being as prepared as I could for that situation. And again, extremely lucky that I didn't see. This was in Washington. This was before that they had passed any kind of ban the box legislation in higher education. But the school that I was at actually didn't have had recently removed the criminal history box, based on some research that had come out to show that they're not really effective. And so again, I think just timing wise, I was really, really fortunate that I had went to this, applied to the school right after they had removed that criminal history box. I had gotten in, and so I had kind of set forth on my goal to become a drug and alcohol counselor, and I started working soon after at a place called Somerset Counseling in Richmond, Washington. And it was not soon after I became a drug and alcohol counselor that I realized very, very quickly that I did not want to be a drug and alcohol counselor. And again, this is back in 2010, 2011, when peer supports really had not taken off. In fact, in Washington, there really were no jobs or really even a carved out career for peer support specialists. They didn't really start coming online until about 2014, 2015. And so I think that, for many, many reasons, I think the biggest reason for me is that I really had never been to treatment before. So I don't think I really understood what a drug and alcohol counselor did. And so I didn't realize that it was really, that role was really kind of just an extension of the criminal justice system that I had just kind of escaped. And I found myself very, very uncomfortable, being on parole, but then, being the arbiter of whether someone went to jail or not, by giving them a UA. I just didn't think that the therapeutic alliance was very good. You were automatically required to tell the criminal justice system, everything about this. Anyways, I like really quickly that I did not want to be started at the four-year university. People had convinced me that I should go on and get my bachelor's degree and not just stop at an associate's degree. And so I did. I went on, and that's where I met my mentor, who would end up becoming my mentor. Her name was Sarah Tergresser. She got me involved in her chronic pain lab at the time, but they were looking at the intersection or the overlap of borderline personality disorder and chronic pain, and then prescription opioid use. This was kind of during the first wave of the prescription opioid epidemic, and it really kind of got me thinking about how these conditions intersect, and then also trying to understand, the influence of each on the other's condition. And so, this was a really, really pivotal time in my life, because I was learning about modeling different kinds of research models based on mental health and substance use disorder. And it was also there that, I was inspired and motivated to apply to graduate school. And so I applied to graduate school, and I ended up getting in to Washington State University. This time I was accepted into the mothership campus, which is in Pullman, Washington. And so while I was there, I also helped begin a collegiate recovery program there back in 2015. When I finished in 2019 and got my PhD, I then got again through a lot of really I think fortunate circumstances was able to attain a postdoc position at Stanford School of Medicine, working in their pain medicine lab. There, I also started a collegiate recovery program, and then most recently, I came here to Boston University School of Public Health, and I'm working as an assistant professor. And so I think it's always important to kind of understand or get a snapshot into a researcher's background to understand what influence. We're all kind of influenced, I think, by our life experiences. And this is just a snapshot into the life experience that I've had that have really kind of played a pivotal role in the work that I do today. Okay, so all of that to say, this is the story that I'm going to lay out for you, or the circumstances that I'm going to lay out for you, was a really interesting one, and it really kind of caught me, I think, a little bit by surprise. As I mentioned, this was kind of my first foray into being a principal investigator on a project. And while I didn't really know what to expect, I don't think I really expected what happened. And so this is a story that happened a couple of years ago. So it was not last summer, but the summer before, at the Association for Recovery and Higher Education conference. And so you need to understand that this conference attracts program administrators, it attracts staff, it attracts researchers, and it attracts students, kind of all involved in collegiate recovery. One thing that I should point out too, and I will talk about the grant here, but I should also point out that I was awarded a grant to study collegiate recovery programs back in 2021. I prepared that grant my first 2 years at Stanford, and then most recently, I'm kind of in the phase of actually doing some of that research. And so some of the following slides that I'm going to show you are from that presentation that I gave at that conference, and are really, like I say, just kind of a snapshot of what I presented there, just so that you guys have some context you all have some context to understand the story that kind of followed that. So there were approximately about, I would say 50 students, and I would say, probably 100 people in the audience of this particular presentation. The full presentation was about 45 minutes. What I'm going to show you here is roughly like a 10 to 15 minute, very small part of the presentation, but you'll totally, I think, be able to follow along. And so, so just to kind of run through some things and talk about kind of why collegiate recovery is kind of important. I think that collegiate recovery programs had a very simple beginning, because at the very beginning of collegiate recovery programs back in the early and late 90s, you basically had 3 programs, right? Augsburg Step Up program, the program at Rutgers, and then the Center for Collegiate Recovery Communities at Texas Tech University, right? And so if you wanted to learn about collegiate recovery programs, you would have to go to one of these 3 places. And then you had a huge proliferation over the last 20 years, right? There's an influx of many programs that have come online. And I think the hard part about all of this and understanding these is that none of these are the same. None of these programs are the same. And again, that's just a small list of the collegiate recovery programs. We went from 3 programs in the late 1990s. From 2000 to about 2013, you went from 3 to about 29 programs. And then 2013, 2014, you saw again a huge expansion of collegiate recovery programs to where today we have about 150 collegiate recovery programs. The thing is, none of these are the same, and so we need really a common language to explain the differences between them, but then also maybe some of the core concepts or the similarities between them as well. And so I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide other than to just give a little bit of background that there's an estimated 600,000 college students that are in recovery from substance use disorder. As you probably know, colleges can be very, very abstinence hostile environments, a lot of times overshadowed by sports programs that really promote and are, I think, walk hand in hand with the alcohol industry, and really, I think, promote excessively, especially alcohol use on college campuses. And so students are oftentimes left with a choice of, continuing or sustaining their recovery, or pursuing a degree in higher education. I think it's also important to understand that the only NIDA funded study that was done on collegiate recovery programs was done quite some time ago. In fact, it was over 10 years ago now. And so those figures and the characterization that came out was is completely outdated now. And so the first part of this grant really is to try and find, was really to try and find common components or core concepts of collegiate recovery programs. This is an implementation science-based project. And so ideally, we would look for evidence-based practices or evidence-based interventions. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say there's anything that rise to the level of like gold standard evidence-based intervention, but we did find some things that kind of our next best methodology, right, where we look for kind of these practice-based evidence, or we look for things that have maybe risen to the level of an evidence-based practice in other settings or other contexts. And so another thing that we can do is look at the standards that were put out by the Association for Recovery in Higher Education. And so one thing that we noted when we looked kind of at all of these things, right? So we looked at the standards by the ARHE. We looked at the other literature that was out there amongst collegiate recovery programs. And then lastly, we looked at the literature in other contexts. So young people in recovery, maybe not in college, that were not currently in college. We looked at maybe adults that were of maybe similar age, or what kind of works in adults, and maybe we can apply that to collegiate recovery as well. And so again, this was kind of from those three forces, we identified these three best practices, you can say, for collegiate recovery programs. And so we want to kind of identify some barriers and facilitators to these kind of core practices. And I know this is really hard, so I'll on the next kind of show these in detail. And so the first the first kind of best practice is self-help groups, and this really could be anything along the lines of mutual aid meetings, so Dharma recovery or all recovery groups, or a lot of times on college campuses you'll see groups that support people with eating disorders, and then kind of the more conventional or historical 12-step groups, AA, NA, marijuana, but basically kind of the gamut of kind of recovery mutual group. The second thing identified was peer recovery support, or was student drop-in centers. The schools with student drop-in centers seem to be able to really sustain programs long-term, endlessly. I'm sure everyone on this call knows was peer recovery supports. And so again, a lot of evidence that would qualify as a evidence-based intervention in college, that I think that there's enough to qualify some of these best practices in concepts collegiate recovery. So as I mentioned, this is a science focused project. So looking at ways to help best do some of these do some of these things, or these evidence-based practices. And so really quickly, the aim one of this grant is to characterize by ethnography some of the core collegiate recovery program elements. This actually, these ethnographies have actually already taken place. I finished all of these in the fall of this year. So I'm really excited to start coding this data and really start looking at some of these qualitative outcomes. But these ethnographies were at 4 different colleges across the country. So University of California, Santa Barbara, Augsburg, Penn State University, and then Texas Tech as well. And aim 2 of the project to do is twofold. It's to do 2 different national ones of which has concluded. We got about 80 program directors across the country, which is pretty good because only 150. So we got about half the program there. The student survey collecting data, we've currently consented to collect 250 or 200 students. We're hoping to get anywhere from 300 to 500, and hopefully by the end of this year we will. Then the last of the
We might have lost Noel. He did mention that there was a winter storm in Boston where he's at, and that his Wi-Fi was acting up. We'll give him a few minutes to jump back on. Looks like he just joined again.
Shannon.
Hey Noel, we can barely hear you.
Okay, my internet is unstable, I'm seeing. Okay, I'm gonna jump off real quick and then jump back on. There's an issue, it looks like, with my, I'm not sure what is happening, but my internet is incredibly now. I'm gonna try and jump on a different basically a different internet feed. I haven't. Apologize, everyone. I'm in Boston. It's had a really bad storm come through, and so the internet has been very bad. I'm really sorry. So hang on just a second.
No worries. Thank you.
All right. Well, this is not much better, but it seems to be working just a tad bit better for right now. At least it's coming through at more than 5 megabytes per second. So I'll share my screen again, and hopefully this will work. You can hear me all right now, right, Shannon?
Correct. Yes. We're getting
Okay.
thumbs up from other folks.
Okay. Um, all right. I'll keep an eye on the screen and see if just make sure that it's working all right. Okay. Again, apologies. So to pick up kind of where I left off, the end goal of this study is to create this toolkit, so that schools will have this guidance, um, uh, with ideally kind of some strong evidence now and in the future, and so that collegiate recovery programs can be easily scaled up. I think that the thing about scaling up collegiate recovery programs is that, unlike a community center, a collegiate or a recovery community center, which takes a lot of money to be invested to start them, because you have to kind of have a brick and mortar building, and you have to have a lot of infrastructure to do. Collegiate recovery programs, I think, can be scaled up, quite easily, just based on the that there are so many colleges kind of across the country, and they don't have to create new buildings. They can just kind of use what they have. And so again, the ability to scale these up would be, with the right amount of research, would be obviously very vital to expanding not just collegiate recovery, but recovery kind of across the country. And so to get back to the story here, this was the presentation that I made at the Association for Recovery in Higher Education. Again, we're just kind of returning to this slide to give you an idea of the audience. And so the amazing thing was, at the end of the presentation, I told people that, or I mentioned to people that, I'm looking for potential collaborators to work with me. So if they know anyone that is interested in doing research kind of in the area, then to have them please reach out to me, or reach out to me yourself. And that was really when the floodgates opened. So I was definitely not ready for the size of my inbox. When I returned home, I likely had anywhere from, I would guess probably, I would say 30 to 50 emails similar to this. Was that, basically people reaching out, very eager to help with this project. And it really got me thinking, why are people in recovery so eager to help? And so I think that there's probably quite a few reasons, but I think that, I've boiled it down to some of the, to some of these overarching things that kind of happen to us when we're in recovery, right? So kind of like that mantra, right? We want to use our experience, strength, and hope to kind of help, and we want to have our lived experience provide value to others. I think that another thing that plays into it is this traditions of mutual help, mutual aid, and self-help groups, right? This progress by helping others. You'll see this, quite often when obviously terminology of these programs is that you have one addict helping another, or one alcoholic kind of helping another. And I think there's something to be said about resilience and redemption as well. You really want to, I think, having gone through something like that, people really want to give back to the community. And so one thing that you pretty much ask everyone that's in recovery what they're most proud of, and my guess is that they're going to they're going to tell you that it's their sobriety. It's the one thing that that they really kind of hang their hat on, and are probably very proud of. And so while this is definitely not an exhaustive list, I think that these are some of the things that kind of lend themselves to uh, for people to really want to help. And again, probably why my email inbox was so full that next day when I got home. So I started a small group of researchers that turned into a large group of researchers. And there was definitely some issues, I would say, that started to arise that I hadn't really taken into account. And so I think that everyone wants to help, but not everyone has the background in the wisdom. I think that there is, one thing that I have noticed, or I think, and I can definitely talk about this in my own story as well, is that I was when I was a kid, I was really I had this belief that I was not one of the smart kids, and so I really held that belief with me all the way until I was in that college and prison program. That belief was just what I mean. I just never believed that I was one of the smart kids, and so even as I was getting into college, and even as I was starting to take some math and statistics courses, I thought there was no way I was going to be able to be successful in some of these higher level math courses. And I think that we tend to take those beliefs in with us. And so one mistake that I think people make is that they don't think that they can do statistics. And so sometimes what you'll see is that those researchers or those individuals will really steer more towards qualitative projects rather than quantitative projects. And so one thing that I began to notice was that, for many individuals, that the statistical training and the writing skills were just kind of not adequate, and that people had really only been involved in qualitative projects and really no implementation science experience whatsoever, which again is not that big of a deal because I think these things can be learned. But the statistical training is where I think people kind of, if you don't have that training in your back pocket, it's one of those things that's hard to go back and learn. And I'll also point out that I think that people tend to be biased by their own experiences. And I think this happens to kind of everyone in recovery. I think that we're biased by our own recovery pathway. And it's just like that for me, it's like that first AA meeting that I used to go to, right? It doesn't matter where I go in this country. I can go to any AA meeting anywhere, but I put them all up against that one that I got sober in back in Richland, Washington. After I had gotten out of prison, that's what I put them all up against. And it's an unfair thing for me to do, but it's a bias that I just carry with me in every AA meeting that I go to. And so I think that we all kind of, and a lot of times unconsciously, hold this recovery, our recovery pathway and our experiences, even though it may not be supported by science, that recovery is the best pathway for that person or for someone in other circumstances. And then the other thing that I noticed is that there are definitely some peers that aren't as open to harm reduction strategies or some of these alternative pathways that are kind of gaining ground these days. And so sometimes that having those biases can get in the way. Some things that I learned kind of really early on in that process that I wanted to start slowly or kind of start with a journal or a writing club. That way it became a little bit easier to weed out unmotivated students. You had a lot of students that say, "Hey, I want to do this. I want to be published. I want a first author publication." But there's a lot of work that goes into those first author publications, and it's definitely not for everyone. And so this was a really, I think, the journal club is a good way to motivate, to weed out some of those individuals that were kind of unmotivated or just didn't really understand what that meant. The other thing that I started to do was basic stats training with people. I would just do some real, start off with some very again basic or ground level stats and just do kind of monthly trainings around some of the stats that we use both in my lab and in the work that I do, just to kind of get people familiar with the kinds of variables that you can use, and then the kinds of variables that we had in the studies that I was doing. And then harm reduction. And I think this is honestly really, really good for all people in recovery. I think that one thing that we tend to do, I know that I tend to do, is that, I sometimes I conflate the expertise that I have in my own lived experience in recovery as scientific evidence, and I really need to make sure that I'm not doing that. That I'm really trying to take in what's out there in the scientific evidence, try to combine that with my own lived experience, and then kind of move forward from there. And so it looks like I have 3 minutes left, and that's perfect time, because I did want to I want to talk about kind of why this is important. Why do we need researchers with lived experience kind of in the field, right? I would say, I go to many conferences. I would say, there's maybe 5% of, and at least outwardly in recovery, of people that go to these huge national conferences that look at addiction and research addiction. There are maybe 5% of people that are in recovery, and I think it's even less as far as having lived experience in the criminal justice system. But it's important. Representation in these areas, in this area especially, is important, because we know that lived experience and perspectives. I mentioned it earlier when I first started with my story, right? It shapes the direction that people go with their research, and it shapes the focus of their research. And we know that research is imperative to changing policy in this country, and advocacy around research is one of the things that a lot of times politicians and policymakers take into account when they're kind of making these policies. And so it's important to have people with lived experience in those kinds of positions of power to be influencing those people. And so I'm just going to run through a couple of things that I've worked on here. This is a paper, probably one of the first papers that I actively or promoted my experience in recovery, along with a whole bunch of other people that kind of went out on a limb and kind of put out that they were also in recovery. And we wrote this paper kind of highlighting as it says, the potential value of insights from lived experience of addiction with researchers with addiction. And so again, this is just one of the many papers that I've now written, but this was the first. And again, it's allowed people to see that it's not just it's not just having these positions, but it's being involved in research that is meaningful and really works to kind of change policy. And then a couple of other things, this experience has really kind of allowed me to kind of find my voice. I've definitely been a lot more public, especially since about halfway through grad school. Before that, I was very, very protective of my experiences in recovery. But since then, I've been really out loud about it, and I found that it really kind of breaks down some barriers that also reduces stigma around addiction, and then it also introduces people to the importance of researchers with lived experience in addiction. These are again some of the other papers that I've published that have really kind of where I've used much more so, I would say, my lived experience as a tool than in some of the other papers that I've written. And probably the one there on top, the prison population reductions in COVID-19, that one probably being the most important, because it was one of the very first papers. A friend of mine and myself, who's also a PhD, did, and it was one of the very first papers that we published. And it was really kind of, where I've used much more so, I would say, my lived experience as a tool than in some of the other papers that I've written. And probably the one there on top, the prison population reductions in COVID-19, that one probably being the most important, because it was one of the very first papers, a friend of mine that was in prison. We knew immediately once COVID was really starting to take hold across the country that we really needed to do this study as soon as possible, based on our own lived experience of being in the criminal justice system and being in these prisons. That we knew that social distancing was basically a pipe dream, or it was basically impossible, where we knew that they would not offer masks. We wanted to make sure that we got the word out that many of these prisons were going to be death boxes or death traps, and hopefully instigate policies that were going to decarcerate the prison systems. And I think it was somewhat effective. But again, if we even saved one life with this paper, everything that I've done up until now in my career is really insignificant to me, because I think that this one paper hopefully did that, hopefully did save a couple of lives around COVID-19. And so with that, I will end. It looks like I went 3 minutes over, but I'll have some time for questions.
Any questions for Noel? You can put them in the chat or feel free to come off mute.
Hi, this is Chandra. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Hi, Noel. Thank you so much for presenting the information. It's very interesting to me, and I could definitely relate to being one of the people that was scared away by math and statistics, and would really love to help with some things, but that is not something I know anything about. My question for you is, to me, it is really near and dear to my heart. I'm a hard of hearing person, and so I'm always advocating for accessibility and recovery spaces for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And one thing that comes up a lot when I'm looking for funding is data. So people want to know, well, how many deaf people are going to be there? Are there even deaf people going to be involved with this thing? And why should we bother putting any money into it, right? And so I was just wondering if through any of your research, you've been encountering any deaf and hard of hearing people, if you are collecting data on that as far as it pertains to recovery.
Man, that is a really great question. I appreciate you bringing that up as well. I think that just in general in America, we do a shitty job, a horrible job of just in general of for all people with disabilities. I think that you've raised a very important research question. This is one, that I have no idea. It's not any data that I'm definitely collecting, but I do feel like it is very important. I think that my guess is that you should at least be able to characterize, how many people. I mean, just even if you know how many, like on average, how many there are people that are deaf in the country, and then you can take the amount of people that are in recovery. And I mean, just even estimating it that way is, for most kinds of grants and stuff like that, they're going to understand that, the data is just not out there, and you're doing your very best to try and estimate how many people you're going to. The hard part about this is, like, this is a marginalized community inside of a marginalized community, and it's something that again, most of us, and I will be the first to admit, right, that we don't put too much thought to it, because it's not something that affects us personally. And so I would just say that I'm really glad that you're thinking about this, that you're pushing places. I know that the American with Disabilities Act should back you up on all of this stuff. I know in school,
you would think so.
In colleges, it's a big.
In colleges, there's a lot more access. That's where I've had the most ease of access to things. So, So I'm gonna look for your contact information. Is it okay if I follow up with you about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I had it on the last slide, but I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Philip.
Yeah, I just so we were looking at the data collection, right? I get that, right? I think it's super important, but oftentimes it's taking place through these large grants, through these huge academic agencies, and I then there's the micro level, right, of peer advisory committee. Our organization has a peer advisory committee so that we have checks and balances in place, so the people that we serve, we're hearing from them, right? Um, and what can we do better next year? What worked for you or what didn't work for you? But I think what gets lost is oftentimes on the micro level, those end up becoming social get-togethers or whatever, because where do we connect to the bigger picture of things, right? Where's this collective that's coming and asking us where these micro groups are, that information is being used as a collective. And I think there's a disconnect between that and the macro view of where people are filling out surveys. And it's oftentimes, in my opinion, questions that aren't as relative as they might be if they came from the peers themselves or the peer specialists that are serving them, because there's not a boots on the ground input. There's not that feedback. So I think, when we're talking about evaluation, we clearly see two types of evaluation, micro and macro. But where are we connecting them out at? And I'm hoping that the answer is well, sure, go here, because there are groups that are getting together with these smaller groups to collect this information and really kind of drill that down a bit. But we're unaware of it. And quite honestly, I will say on the micro level, organizing peer groups that are receiving services is hard, because people have things going on in their life, and if it's not incentivized, it may not be their jam for very long, or they feel that they're not connected enough to continue an input. And I feel like some of these, I don't know, oftentimes the ongoing input is coming from people that maybe have more recovery capital, or incentivized programs that are keeping them in touch, and it just doesn't seem too organic to me. And I know that's a lot there, but I guess I'm just kind of wondering about that disconnect between the micro and macro evaluation perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you pointed out, I mean, many problems, and there is a lot of disconnect. I mean, we've created this research world in America that, like you said, has a lot of faults, where we're not getting a lot of the research that we need until 5 years later, because of the way that grants work, the way that publications work, the way that data collection works, and it creates a huge disconnect. I would definitely, for anyone on this call, I think that the best website for like data is and they're collecting, like you said, they're collecting some of the qualitative data that I think you can get a lot more rapidly, but they're also have some longitudinal projects as well. But it's John Kelly's group, the Recovery Research Institute at so RRI is what it's called, and I'll find the link and put it in the chat. I'm sure my guess is that many people are already fully aware of it on this call, but that seems to be where the I think the most recent, and they do a pretty good job of kind of getting it out there as well. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, what you're kind of I think pointing out is that we need not just this large scale research, but we also need like really high quality program evaluations as well, that are not propaganda, that are actually collecting the data and finding what not just speaking to funders, but speaking the language of like, this is what's working and this is not.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is it Michael? You're muted.
Sorry about that. We're logged in together, but my name's Carolina.
Oh, hi, Carolyn.
So thank you so much for the presentation. I am in California at an RCO. We just got our building in RCC, the Happier Life Project, and I was wondering if you have any recommendations for, we're just embarking on program eval, right? Looking at our sustainability plans and looking at our different programs, and research and eval of all of our programs is like at the top of the list for sustained funding. Like, do you have any recommendations as to kind of where to start for training for staff? We do some things internally with some of the programs, but how can we start building upon and really training who we have already, our peers, to move forward, or tools or anything in this space of recovery community centers? I do follow RRI also. We are in some of their other grants, research grants, hopefully, but it seems to be kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
In that, because of the nature of the work that we do, right?
Yeah.
It just is if it's so individually based, right? And in person driven, it's like, how do you have a measure? I mean, I don't know, is it level of engagement? Different things. So I know that was a lot, but if you have any support in that or guidance as to where to go to start as an org for training, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I don't know if you remember, but I think we're on the California. Yeah. I knew your face looked familiar.
Yes.
Because I just moved from California in
Yes.
September, and so I've only been here for a little bit. But I think so. The place that I know of that seems to be operating like a well-oiled machine is the Unity Recovery Center in Philadelphia. I don't know if they put out any trainings. I know that they're working to put out some trainings. I know that they also have a grant or not them, but the guy that runs it has a grant to really kind of, I think, get at exactly what you're saying. A more well-oiled machine as far as recovery, not just research, but then also like implementation, right? Trainings around what does a peer recovery specialist do? What does a recovery coach do? Some of those kinds of just, I think, basic kinds of things around peer support services. So to that, I would really say, like, to be continued. I agree with you. There's not a whole lot right now, but I think that there helps on the way.
Yeah, we used to have Recovery Link. We went back to the recovery data platform just because that when it went to 2.0, we didn't get a lot of support, unfortunately. But I could maybe go back in. I mean, I know the recovery ecosystem and a lot of the papers that he's written and different things like that. I just end up looking, and it's like there's not a lot of people that look like me or are like me. Or we deal a lot with like our Native American population.
Yeah.
Los, Hispanos, things like that just is like, that's also lacking. So it almost feels like it's very different base. I mean, even decolonizing the way we gather data for our indigenous, population. And it's just this whole thing where it's just like, okay, how do you get more funding to help support these initiatives? Like, where do you get the funding that actually helps create then what this looks like? Because what's out there isn't really matching, or I'm not sure what I'm going with that.
Yeah, no, and it frustrates me even more being a cog in that system, really. I mean, the way that research and SAMHSA funds treatment and recovery, like, it's just not very helpful at this point. And so hopefully we're on the precipice of bigger and better things, I hope. But
Okay.
I think I have time for, yeah, absolutely. It's so good to see you. I think I have time for one more question, that I do have to jet to a board meeting. So Diana, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have a question. As you mentioned about your research in the collegial recovery programs, and my understanding, these are recovery programs at the colleges, universities, for perhaps students or professors that may be using. And my question is, and you also mentioned about the intersectionality connection with the mental health. I mean, that is a time period when you're in college. When I was in college, I see so many of my friends, using or either using alcohol and substance, that clearly there's that stress and pressure level. and then what types of policy from either mental health and then also peer support in the sense of mental health support and that of support that in your work or in terms of pushing policies or pushing changes at the more of a higher level in school in higher education.
Yeah. So what I did for you, Diana, is, and again, because that's a really, really long answer. And I think that some really good, like, to ground you in some of the research that's out there and some of the research that I've done, I put 2 articles into the chat. Hopefully, maybe Shannon, you can download those and then send them to everyone. But that would be those is where I would start. I think those will give you a good overview of kind of the stakeholders of collegiate recovery programs and then kind of the research that's been done.
All right, and just as a reminder, everything that's been shared in the chat, I'll include in the follow-up email. That'll go out before the end of the week. Noel, I know you have to jet, so thank you so much for being here and sharing today. And thanks everyone for being here. And
yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Thank
End of
you,
the
guys.
calendar year, so lots of wrap up. So happy holidays. Hope everyone gets some time off to rest and relax and spend time as they want. And we'll see you next time.
Take care.